The snow was coming. Nora Hartley could smell it in the air, sharp and metallic, as she stood at the end of the dirt road staring at the final ranch on her list. Behind her lay 14 miles of rejection. 14 doors slammed in her face. 14 voices telling her the same thing. We don't hire women with your kind of trouble. Her hands trembled inside her worn gloves. Not from cold, though the November wind cut through her thin coat like a blade. From exhaustion. From fear. From the terrible certainty that if this last door closed, she had nowhere left to go. The ranch house sat low and weathered against the Montana horizon. Smoke curled from the chimney. Cattle moved slowly across distant fields. A single lamp burned in the window. She had walked since dawn. Her boots had split along the seams 2 days ago. Her feet bled, but she lifted her chin, smoothed her muddy skirt, and knocked. Silence. She knocked again. The door opened. A man filled the frame. Tall, broad-shouldered, maybe 40. His face was hard and lined, carved by wind and work. Dark eyes studied her with the wary intensity of someone who had learned to trust nothing that arrived unexpected. "Help you?" His voice was low, rough. "I'm looking for work," Nora said. Her voice wavered despite her effort to keep it steady. "Any work. Cooking, cleaning, mending. I'm strong. I learn quick." He looked past her, scanning the empty road. "You walk here?" "Yes, sir." "From where?" "Bitter Springs." His eyes narrowed. "That was 14 miles. Alone?" She nodded. "Why?" The question hung between them like a challenge. She could lie. She could soften it. But she was too tired, too desperate, too done with pretending. "Because I was turned away from every door in town," she said. "Because my husband gambled away everything we had and shot himself in our barn 6 weeks ago. Because his creditors sold our land to cover his debts and left me with nothing. Because the women in Bitter Springs call me cursed and the men call me worse." Her voice cracked. She steadied it. "Because I haven't eaten in 2 days, and if you turn me away, I don't know what happens next." The wind pushed against her back. Snow began to fall, light and quiet. The man stood motionless, his face unreadable. Then he stepped aside. "Come in." She almost didn't believe it. Her legs shook as she crossed the threshold. Inside, the cabin was warm. A fire burned steady in the stone hearth. The room was plain but clean. Rough furniture, shelves lined with tools and books, a rifle mounted above the door. The smell of coffee and wood smoke filled the air. He gestured toward a chair near the fire. "Sit." She obeyed, sinking into the worn wood with a relief so profound it brought tears to her eyes. He ladled stew into a bowl and set it before her with a chunk of bread. "Eat slow. Your stomach won't thank you otherwise." She forced herself to follow his advice, though every instinct screamed to devour it. The stew was simple: venison, potatoes, carrots, but it tasted like mercy. He poured coffee and sat across from her, watching quietly. When she finally set down the spoon, she met his gaze. "Thank you." He nodded once. "What's your name?" he asked. "Nora Hartley." "I'm Callan Reed." The name meant something. She had heard it whispered in town. The Reed place. Man lives alone. Doesn't talk to anyone. Lost his whole family in a fire 10 years back. Hasn't been the same since. "Why'd you let me in?" she asked. He studied her for a long moment. "Because I know what it's like when every door closes." The firelight reflected in his dark eyes. Something about the way he said it told her he wasn't speaking in metaphor. "I can work," she said quickly. "I won't be a burden." "I can." He held up a hand, stopping her. "You can stay until the snow clears. After that, we'll see." Relief flooded through her so powerfully she had to grip the table to stay upright. "There's a small room off the kitchen," he continued. "Used to be the housekeeper's. It's yours. I expect honesty and hard work. I don't expect trouble. You won't have it," she promised. He stood, moving toward the window. Outside, snow fell heavier now, blanketing the fields in white. "Storm's settling in," he said quietly. "You wouldn't have made it another mile." Nora looked at her torn boots, her bleeding hands, the coat that barely kept her warm. He was right. She had been walking toward her own grave. But Callan Reed had opened his door. She didn't know yet that in 3 weeks, men would ride up that same road demanding she be handed over. She didn't know that Callan would stand between her and them with a rifle in his hands and a quiet fury in his voice. She only knew that for the first time in 6 weeks, she was warm. And that was enough. The first morning, Nora woke before dawn in the small room off the kitchen. The bed was narrow but clean. A quilt, stitched by hands long gone, lay folded at the foot. She had slept deeply for the first time since Henry died, her body surrendering to exhaustion and warmth. She dressed quickly and stepped into the kitchen. Callan was already up, pulling on his coat near the door. "Didn't mean to wake you," he said. "You didn't. I'm used to early mornings." He studied her a moment, then gestured toward the stove. "Coffee's hot. I'll be in the barn until mid-morning." Before she could respond, he was gone. Nora moved through the cabin slowly, learning its rhythms. She washed the breakfast dishes he'd left, swept the floors, mended a torn curtain with thread from her small back. By the time he returned, she had bread rising near the fire and venison stew simmering. Callan stopped in the doorway, surprise flickering across his weathered face. "You didn't have to. I told you I'd work," she said simply. They ate in comfortable silence. Afterward, he showed her the ranch. 40 head of cattle, a dozen chickens, 2 horses, and land that stretched toward the mountains. It was modest, but well kept. Everything spoke of a man who worked alone and worked hard. "You run this place by yourself?" she asked. "Half for 10 years. That's a lot for one man." He shrugged. "Keeps me busy." She understood what he didn't say. Busy means I don't have to think. The days fell into a rhythm. She cooked, cleaned, mended. He worked the land, tended the animals, chopped wood. They spoke little, but the silence between them wasn't empty. It was respectful. One evening, as she stitched a button onto his work shirt, he spoke from his chair by the fire. "You don't talk about him." She didn't need to ask who he meant. "There's not much to say. Henry was charming when we met. Reckless after we married. He loved cards more than he loved me." Her needle paused. When he lost everything, he couldn't face it. So he didn't. Callan's jaw tightened. "That wasn't your fault. The town thinks otherwise. A man doesn't destroy himself unless his wife drove him to it. That's what they whisper." "People whisper because thinking is harder," Callan said quietly. She looked up. "What do they whisper about you?" He met her gaze steadily. "That I let my family burn." The words hung heavy in the room. "My wife and daughter died in a fire," he continued. "I was in town. By the time I got back, the house was ash. Some folks said I should have been home. Said a man who tends his ranch instead of his family deserves what he gets." Nora's throat tightened. "That's cruel. It's easier than admitting sometimes bad things just happen." They sat in silence, 2 people marked by tragedy, finding unexpected understanding in a shared fire. 3 weeks passed. The snow deepened. Nora grew stronger. Her hands healed. Her spirit steadied. She began to laugh again, small sounds at first, then fuller ones when Callan's dry humor caught her off guard. He began to smile more. Not often, but enough. Then one afternoon, riders appeared on the horizon. Callan spotted them from the barn. He moved quickly toward the house, his face grim. "Get inside," he told Nora. "Stay away from the windows." Her stomach dropped. "Who are they?" "Don't know yet. But nobody rides out here in winter without a reason." She obeyed, watching through a crack in the curtain as 5 men dismounted. The leader was tall, well-dressed, his face sharp and cold. She recognized him immediately. Lawrence Kemper, Henry's biggest creditor. Her blood turned to ice. Callan stepped onto the porch, rifle held loose but ready. "Help you gentlemen?" he asked. Kemper smiled without warmth. "We're looking for Nora Hartley. Heard she might be here." "Why?" "She owes a debt." "Her husband's debt," Callan corrected. "A wife inherits her husband's obligations," Kemper said smoothly. "She signed papers guaranteeing his loans. That makes her responsible." Nora's hands shook. She had signed papers. Henry had shoved them in front of her one night, drunk and desperate, and she'd been too afraid to refuse. "She has nothing left to take," Callan said. Kemper's smile widened. "She has herself. There are establishments that buy contracts. She works off the debt. Legally binding." The words hit Nora like a fist. They wanted to sell her. Force her into servitude, or worse. Callan's voice dropped, cold and deadly. "She's not going anywhere." "You harboring another man's debtor?" Kemper's tone turned sharp. "That's illegal. So is fraud. And I'm guessing those papers weren't explained properly." Kemper's jaw tightened. "This doesn't concern you, Reed." Callan raised the rifle slightly. "It does now." The men behind Kemper shifted, hands moving toward their guns. Inside, Nora's heart pounded. Callan was 1 man against 5. If this turned violent, he would die defending her. She couldn't let that happen. She stepped onto the porch. Nora, get back inside, Callan said sharply, not taking his eyes off the man. She ignored him. She walked down the steps slowly, her chin high despite the terror coursing through her veins. Mr. Kemper, she said quietly, I'll come with you. No, you won't, Callan said. She looked at him. His face was hard, but his eyes held something raw. Desperation. The look of a man who had already lost everything once and refused to lose again. I won't let you die for me, she said softly. And I won't let you be sold like cattle, he replied. Kemper laughed, cold and sharp. How touching. But the law is the law, Reed. She signed a contract. A contract signed under duress isn't legal, Callan said. And you know it. Prove it in court, Kemper sneered. Until then, she comes with us. One of Kemper's men stepped forward. Callan's rifle swung toward him. Next man who moves gets shot, Callan said quietly. The air went deadly still. Then hoofbeats sounded from the road. Another rider approached, older, wearing a sheriff's badge. Sheriff Hackett from Bitter Springs. He dismounted slowly, his weathered face taking in the scene. What's going on here, he asked. Kemper smiled. Just collecting on a legal debt, Sheriff. Hackett looked at Nora. That true, ma'am. My husband owed Mr. Kemper money, Nora said carefully. He made me sign papers. But I didn't understand. She understood. Kemper interrupted. Her ignorance isn't my problem. Hackett turned to Callan. Reed, lower the rifle. Not until they leave, Callan replied. The sheriff sighed. Kemper, let me see the contract. Kemper handed over the papers with smug confidence. Hackett read slowly, his expression darkening. This says she guaranteed loans totaling $800, Hackett said. Correct. And you valued her labor at 10 years of service to cover it. Standard terms. Hackett folded the papers. Except Montana territory law says a woman can't be held liable for her husband's gambling debts unless she directly benefited. Did Mrs. Hartley benefit from these loans, Kemper? Kemper's smile faltered. Her husband gambled it away, Hackett said flatly. She got nothing, which means this contract's worthless. Relief flooded through Nora so powerfully her knees nearly buckled. Kemper's face flushed with fury. That's legal, Hackett finished. Now get off Mr. Reed's land before I arrest you for attempted fraud. Kemper stared at Nora with cold hatred. This isn't over. It is, Callan said quietly, rifle still raised. And if you come back, you'll deal with me. There was something in his voice, a promise of violence so certain and unflinching that even Kemper stepped back. The men mounted and rode away, Kemper casting one last venomous look over his shoulder. When they disappeared over the ridge, Callan finally lowered his rifle. His hand shook slightly. Hackett turned to Nora. Ma'am, I'm sorry for what you've been through. Kemper's been pulling this scheme on widows across 3 counties. You're the first one with someone willing to stand up for you. She looked at Callan. He was staring at the horizon, jaw tight, still holding himself like a man ready for war. Thank you, Sheriff, she managed. Hackett tipped his hat and rode off. Silence settled over the ranch. Snow began to fall again, soft and quiet. You shouldn't have come outside, Callan said finally. You were going to get yourself killed, she replied. He turned to face her. Better me than you sold to. He couldn't finish the sentence. Callan, she said gently. Why did you do that? He stared at her for a long moment. The walls he'd built around himself for 10 years cracked open. Because when you knocked on my door, you reminded me what it felt like to care whether someone lived or died. He said quietly. I'd forgotten. And I don't want to forget again. Tears slid down her cheeks. I don't want to forget either. He stepped closer. Then stay. Not because you owe me. Not because you have nowhere else. Stay because you want to. She reached for his hand. His fingers closed around hers, rough and warm and steady. I want to, she whispered. He exhaled, something like relief and hope mixed together. That spring, they married in the small church in Bitter Springs. The town whispered, but neither of them cared. They had learned that whispers couldn't touch what was built on truth. Nora planted a garden behind the house. Callan expanded the herd. Together, they rebuilt what had been broken, not just the ranch, but themselves. On quiet evenings, they sat on the porch watching the Montana sky turn gold and purple. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they simply existed together, 2 people who had walked through fire and found each other on the other side. And when strangers asked how they met, Callan always answered the same way. She knocked. I opened the door. It was simple. It was true. And it was enough.